Welcome back to World Studies. We are continuing on with the course of the war, World War II. We'll finish up probably the war today in the notes. Remember, this is your last video for week 4. We're on page 337. 337. We've talked about the different theaters of war: Western Europe, Eastern Europe, North Africa, and then we'll conclude or continue with the theater in the Pacific. One thing before I get into this video, you may have noticed I added an additional video for your viewing enjoyment. It's one of Winston Churchill's speeches. This was their finest hour speech. The reason I chose that video, one, I just wanted so that you could hear what Winston Churchill sounded like. He was the leader of England during World War II. He helped inspire his people to continue fighting the war when Germany was trying to take over Britain but failed to do so. Also, that speech is found in your homework that I'll be assigning tonight. So in case you wanted to follow along as you read through the homework, that's another reason why you can refer to it. It's just audio of his voice as you go through it. So we're at number 4, the Pacific. Quick question again. What attack brought the U.S. into this war? That's right, the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, a day that would live in infamy. Well, continuing the war, Japan took more islands in the Pacific, including the Philippines. At this time, the Philippines belonged to the U.S. Japanese forces overwhelmed the Philippines, and although American forces fought hard and bravely, they were forced to surrender after several months. The Japanese treated captured American forces with great brutality, and hundreds died in their death camps. A little bit more information about, one of the things that, while things were looking bad for Americans, there was another event that kind of helped reawaken hope for Americans. On April 18th, 1942, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led a force of 16 B-25 bombers to attack Japanese cities. Doolittle's planes launched from the USS Hornet in the western Pacific and flew east toward Japan's main islands. All 16 planes were lost on this mission, and the bombs did little physical damage, but the psychological damage inflicted on the Japanese was immense. Following this attack, the Japanese military leaders made a series of decisions that contributed to their defeat. If you've ever heard of that event, that was known as the Doolittle Raids. Douglas MacArthur became the supreme Allied commander in the Pacific. Eventually, Japan had conquered more than it could defend, and MacArthur, who had been stationed in the Philippines and had been ordered to leave before being captured, yet he promised to return. 2 major battles ended Japanese expansion. In 1942, the naval battles in the Coral Sea and Midway Island ended Japanese expansion. Again, if you are looking at the map on page 337, the Coral Sea is located near Guadalcanal and New Guinea, so you can see that area of the ocean. And then Midway Island would be located not too far from the Hawaiian Islands from Pearl Harbor. So those 2 battles were key battles. The first battle preserved Australia's safety from Japanese attack. And at Midway Island, a U.S. military base, although the Japanese had more forces, the U.S. attacked first. As the tide turned, the U.S. took strategic islands for air bases as it worked its way to Japan. They bypassed other islands and left the Japanese troops there stranded to await the end of the war. One of their victories included recapturing the Philippines, of which MacArthur could proudly declare, "I have returned." By 1945, American forces were within bombing distance of Japan. Letter B, major turning points. You know what a turning point is? A turning point is, at one point, it's going in one direction. And then at this turning point, it all changes. Up to this point, it looked like the Axis powers had been doing a pretty good job. They had been winning the war. But now things have begun to change. You can see with the battles of Coral Sea and Midway, that was a turning point in the Pacific. Let's see some turning points now taking place in Europe. The U.S. had helped defeat the British defeat the Axis in North Africa in 1942. In 1943, Dwight D. Eisenhower led U.S. forces from North Africa into Italy, forcing their surrender. They first captured the island of Sicily. As the Allies advanced into Italy, the government surrendered. However, large numbers of German troops continued to resist the Allied advance north through Italy. On June 6, 1944, another turning point in the war took place when the Allied invasion of France occurred. So on June 6, 1944, a very testable date. I know, we got a lot of them this chapter. Also known as D-Day, took place. The assault took place across 50 miles of 5 beaches. 175,000 men landed on that first day. Within 3 weeks, 1 million soldiers, 500,000 tons of supplies, and nearly 200,000 vehicles had landed in France. Although fighting continued for a year longer, Germany's defeat was now certain. Letter C, conclusion of the war. Germany eventually lost control of all the territory that it had conquered. The U.S., British, French, and others helped push the enemy all the way back into Germany. The Japanese fought hard and brutally. Few Japanese soldiers became prisoners of war, but their zeal proved to be no match for superior air and naval power. So let's talk about the end of the war. First of all, in Europe. In the winter of 1944, known as the Battle of the Bulge, it was Hitler's last offensive attempt to break the Allies' line. It failed. It's called the Bulge because literally it created a lump, a bulge, in the Allied line as the Germans tried to push back into Belgium and break up the Allied forces. By spring, it created a bulge, but it was ultimately defeated. It failed. By spring of 1945, Allied forces had pushed its way to the heart of Germany itself, into Berlin. A little background into the end of Hitler. Facing certain defeat and the invasion of Russian forces, Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker on April 30th, 1945. Instead of telling German troops the truth about Hitler's suicide, German authorities told them that Hitler died in the line of duty while fighting the Russian forces. German generals surrendered a few days later and ended the war in Europe. On May 8th, 1945, VE Day, Victory in Europe, is celebrated after Germany's defeat. Number 2, Japan. In the summer of 1945, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki when it appeared the Japanese would not surrender any other way. The U.S. had demanded Japan's surrender. Japan had refused. Even after massive bombings of Japanese cities with explosive and incendiary bombs, the Japanese planned to defend their homeland to the last person. Finally, the U.S. decided to use the newly invented atomic bombs. The first dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th. The blast destroyed nearly 5 square miles of the city and immediately killed about 70,000 people. Another 70,000 suffered terrible injuries from the blast. Again, the U.S. demanded surrender. Again, Japan refused. The second bomb was dropped on August 9th on Nagasaki. On August 14th, Japan agreed to surrender. Of course, the atomic bomb is the most destructive, the most explosive weapons ever used in warfare. You can see the picture on the left, the aerial view of the mushroom cloud that was caused from this explosion. The pictures on the right show you the view of the city before the explosion, and then the view of the city after the explosion. You can see how much, you see all that's left is, part of that one church, as well as parts of the roads. Really, everything else was wiped out. Very destructive, very deadly. But the results were Japan's surrender. On September 2nd, 1945, exactly 6 years and 1 day after the start of the war, VJ, Victory in Japan Day, is celebrated as the official end to World War II. For your homework, I need you guys to work on page 149 in your activities book. We've already talked about this a little bit at the beginning of this lesson. Page 149 is some of Churchill's written or spoken words that he gave. You just need to do page 149. So do this reading on that page, answer the 5 questions, and then turn in that homework with your packet. That's all that we're covering for this week. So please make sure you have the test, the quiz, and the homework ready to be turned in. Keep the notes because we still have more notes to cover for this chapter. Hope you enjoy the weekend. Be good, do good.